In the dusty vaults of forgotten history, a leather-bound book whispers horrors no one dared speak. 18 children, born in shadows, their skin pale as ghosts, sold into silence. But one entry burns through the lies, burned it all. God forgive me. What sin stained this Virginia soil so deep that even flames couldn't erase it? And what divine justice awaits those who play God with human souls? In the year of our Lord 1830, the Hartley Plantation sprawled like a festering wound across the Virginia Piedmont, its 12,200 acres a testament to man's insatiable greed and the devil's quiet temptations. The land rolled in deceptive beauty, emerald tobacco fields undulating under a relentless sun, bisected by a creek that swelled with spring rains like the wrath of an Old Testament flood, only to wither to a parched vein in summer's heat. The air hung heavy with the sweet rot of curing leaves, mingled with the acrid tang of sweat and soil, a sensory assault that masked the deeper decay, the moral rot eating at the heart of this so-called paradise. Here, in this earthly domain, Robert Hartley III reigned as a petty god, his authority unquestioned, his sins yet to be tallied in the ledger of divine judgment. But to understand the abyss that opened on this cursed ground, we must peer into the origins of the man who would orchestrate a symphony of suffering. Robert's lineage traced back to 1768, when his great-grandfather, a shrewd colonial merchant, traded in human cargo and shipping contracts to claim this vast estate. Each generation had expanded it, not through honest toil, but through the lash and the chain, building wealth on the broken backs of the enslaved. The main house loomed at the apex, a Georgian monolith of white columns and red brick, its facade gleaming like a hypocrite's smile under the noonday sun. 12 rooms echoed with the ghosts of past indulgences, polished mahogany tables where deals were struck, crystal chandeliers tinkling like mocking laughter, and velvet drapes that shut out the cries from the fields beyond. Surrounding it, the formal gardens bloomed in ironic splendor, roses the color of spilled blood, hedges trimmed to geometric perfection by hands that bled from thorns. Yet, step beyond this veneer, and the true machinery of hell revealed itself. The kitchen stood detached, a squat brick sentinel connected by a covered walkway that creaked underfoot like bones grinding. Smoke curled eternally from its chimney, carrying the scents of cornbread and stew simmering over open flames, meals prepared by those who ate scraps in the shadows. Further out lay the outbuildings, the smokehouse where hams hung like condemned souls, their fatty drips echoing in the dim, the dairy with its cool stone floors slick with spilled milk, a place of quiet labor where women churned butter until their arms screamed, the laundry where steam rose like purgatorial mists, irons hissing against starched linen stained with the sweat of the oppressed. And then, the heart of the darkness, 2 rows of slave cabins, 20 in all, huddled like forgotten prayers at the edge of the fields. These were no homes, but hovels, crude timber frames patched with mud, roofs leaking during storms that seemed sent by an angry god. Inside, dirt floors absorbed the tears of generations, thin pallets of straw served as beds where families clung together against the night's chill. The air inside was thick with the musk of unwashed bodies, the faint smoke of meager fires, and the ever-present undercurrent of fear, a palpable thing that clung to the skin like damp cloth. Here lived 202 souls, catalogued in the plantation's ledgers not as humans, but as chattel, men valued for their muscle, women for their wombs, children as future investments. Infants wailed in the arms of elders too frail to work, their cries a haunting lullaby that pierced the pre-dawn silence. The elderly, bent like ancient oaks, whispered stories of Africa under their breath, tales of freedom stolen, of gods forsaken in this new Babel. The white inhabitants numbered a mere 12, the Hartley family, swollen with inherited privilege, the overseer, a brutish man named Elias Crow, whose whip cracked like thunder and whose eyes gleamed with sadistic glee, his wife, a silent spectre who averted her gaze from the atrocities, a tutor droning Latin to indifferent children, and craftsmen whose hammers rang out in the workshops, forging tools of oppression. This microcosm operated with the cold precision of an infernal clockwork. The dawn bell tolled at 4:30 in high season, a brazen clang that shattered dreams and summoned the weary. Field gangs assembled in the gray light, tools thrust into calloused hands, hoes glinting like scythes, plows heavy as crosses. They marched to the fields, backs bent under the overseer's watchful eye, the sun rising like a judgmental eye over the horizon. Labor stretched until dusk, broken only by a midday meal of cornmeal mush and salted pork, eaten in the dirt while flies buzzed like demons. House servants fared no better, their days a blur of subservience. They rose before the stars faded, stoking fires that warmed masters' beds, preparing breakfasts of eggs and ham that they could only smell. Evenings extended into night, scrubbing floors until knuckles bled, serving dinners where laughter rang hollow. Children under 10 lingered in a makeshift nursery, supervised by crones whose stories wove biblical warnings, tales of Pharaoh's plagues, of slaves freed by a vengeful God. Those over 10 apprenticed in trades, their small hands learning to weave or forge, bodies hardening for the yoke by 14. It was a system designed not just for profit, but for the erosion of the soul, a slow grinding that turned humans into husks, their spirits crying out for redemption in silent prayers. Robert Hartley III had been molded for this throne of thorns since his first breath. Born into the silver spoon of privilege, he was young Robert until fate's cruel stroke felled his father. His upbringing was a curriculum in domination, crop rotations taught as strategies of conquest, soil management as the art of extraction, labor allocation as the science of subjugation. At 16, he was dispatched to Richmond. Hammers rang out in the workshops, forging tools of oppression. This microcosm operated with the cold precision of an infernal clockwork. The dawn bell tolled at 4:30 in high season, a brazen clang that shattered dreams and summoned the weary. Field gangs assembled in the gray light, tools thrust into calloused hands, hoes glinting like scythes, plows heavy as crosses. They marched to the fields, backs bent under the overseer's watchful eye, the sun rising like a judgmental eye over the horizon. Labor stretched until dusk, broken only by a midday meal of cornmeal mush and salted pork, eaten in the dirt while flies buzzed like demons. House servants fared no better, their days a blur of subservience. They rose before the stars faded, stoking fires that warmed masters' beds, preparing breakfasts of eggs and ham that they could only smell. Evenings extended into night, scrubbing floors until knuckles bled, serving dinners where laughter rang hollow. Children under 10 lingered in a makeshift nursery, supervised by crones whose stories wove biblical warnings, tales of Pharaoh's plagues, of slaves freed by a vengeful God. Those over 10 apprenticed in trades, their small hands learning to weave or forge, bodies hardening for the yoke by 14. It was a system designed not just for profit, but for the erosion of the soul, a slow grinding that turned humans into husks, their spirits crying out for redemption in silent prayers. Robert Hartley III had been molded for this throne of thorns since his first breath. Born into the silver spoon of privilege, he was young Robert until fate's cruel stroke felled his father. His upbringing was a curriculum in domination, crop rotations taught as strategies of conquest, soil management as the art of extraction, labor allocation as the science of subjugation. At 16, he was dispatched to Richmond. Ostensibly to study law, not to practice justice, but to wield it as a shield for his family's sins. The city was a glittering snare, its state capital rising proud amid the squalor of slave auctions and teeming docks. Grand homes of merchants stood sentinel over streets where human cargo shuffled in chains, the air thick with the cries of the auction block and the stink of the James River. Young Robert boarded with his mother's cousin, a lawyer whose offices smelled of ink and ambition. Classes at the private academy drilled him in contracts and precedents, but the real education came after dark, gambling dens where cards slapped like judgments, horse races thundering with false promises, taverns where whiskey burned away inhibitions. His allowance, fat from tobacco profits, melted in these fires, debts piling like unpaid tithes. He borrowed from peers, then merchants, then usurers whose rates rivaled biblical usury. By 21, his exceeded $2,000, a fortune that could buy lives, now squandered on vice. Letters home painted rosy pictures, studies progressing, social graces honed. But the cousin, buried in briefs, turned a blind eye, and Robert II, back on the plantation, dreamed of his son's triumphant return. Then, divine intervention, or was it temptation's guise, struck in February 1832. Robert II collapsed over his desk, a stroke twisting his body like a gnarled root. The left side paralyzed, speech reduced to guttural moans, he lingered as a living ghost. The doctor from Fredericksburg, his bag heavy with leeches and laudanum, pronounced the verdict: survival possible, but leadership lost. The plantation hungered for a new master. Young Robert received the summons in Richmond, grief warring with guilty relief. Creditors would pause their hounding, a filial duty bought time. He packed his secrets and departed, but not alone. Enter Margaret Ashworth, a fragile bloom in this thorny tale. Met at a Richmond soiree 6 months prior, she was 17, fresh from Philadelphia's finishing schools where she'd learned the arts of refinement, French conjugations, piano scales, needlepoint patterns that mimicked life's intricate deceptions. Orphaned by her father's death, a Charleston merchant whose ships carried rice and ruin, she inherited $8,000 in rice fields yielding annual gold. To Robert, she was salvation wrapped in silk, a dowry to douse his debts. He courted her with feverish charm, whispers of Virginia grandeur masking his desperation. Her guardians, distant kin, saw prestige in the heartly name Old Virginia blood, tobacco empires. They blessed the union without peering beneath the surface. They wed in January 1832, a hushed ceremony in a Richmond chapel, stained glass casting rainbow judgments on the altar. Margaret's diary, filled with girlish hopes, passed to Robert's control as law demanded, her thoughts now his property. He liquidated portions of her fortune, debts extinguished, plantation coffers bolstered. Weeks later, the stroke sealed their exodus. Margaret arrived at Hartley Plantation in March, carriage wheels crunching gravel like bones underfoot. The house welcomed her with deceptive warmth, fires crackling in hearths, servants bowing low. But reality clawed through the illusion. Philadelphia had not schooled her in slavery's raw visage, fields alive with bent figures, whips cracking like serpents' tongues, the metallic tang of blood in the air during corrections. Her first week shattered her. From an upstairs window, lace curtains fluttering like feudal veils, she witnessed the overseer stripe a field hand, shirt torn, back lacerated, cries echoing like psalms of lament. Nausea rose like bile from hell, she retched into porcelain, then barricaded herself in her chamber, sobs racking her frame. Robert found her at dusk, irritation masking concern. "Country ways?" "My dear," he cooed, voice smooth as oiled leather. "Firm hand keeps order. You'll adjust." Adjust she did, or rather, averted, eyes downcast during inspections, ears deaf to distant screams. Her schooling in propriety served well: maintain the facade, ignore the abyss, tend the hearth while men stoked the fires of damnation. The household pulsed with its own rhythms. 12 servants orbited the main house, a cook whose pots clanged like accusatory bells, assistants chopping onions with tears mirroring their own, a butler pouring wine with trembling hands, maids dusting surfaces that hid deeper stains, laundry women wringing linens white as false purity. Patience, Margaret's inherited maid from Charleston, wise-eyed and watchful, a manservant polishing boots to mirror shine, a boy scampering with messages, his youth a fleeting mercy. They slept in attached quarters, beds hard as judgment stones, dreams haunted by the morrow's toll. Among them lurked a figure of quiet peril, an 18-year-old house servant, ledger noted as mulatto, female, value $600. Purchased in 1828 from a Maryland estate sale, her skills, cleaning, cooking, sewing, forbidden literacy, elevated her to indoor duties. Light-skinned, features softened by mixed ancestry, she navigated the treacherous middle ground, valued for proximity to whiteness, vulnerable to its predations. Patience, seasoned in household shadows, warned Margaret subtly, keep the girl occupied, visible, never alone. Margaret, innocent as Eve before the fall, heeded without full comprehension. For 2 years, equilibrium held a fragile peace amid brewing storms. Robert steered the ship, tobacco negotiations in smoke-filled Richmond parlors, credit lines extended on family reputation, overseer directives barked from horseback. Margaret orchestrated domestic symphonies, menus of roasted fowl and pies, servant rotations like clockwork, social teas where neighbors gossiped over china cups. Church on Sundays at the Episcopal steeple, hymns rising like incense to a seemingly deaf heaven. Dinners hosted under candlelight, laughter masking marital chill. Robert deemed her dull, her sensitivities a nuisance, she found him brutish, his study nights reeking of whiskey and regret. Yet, the union functioned, gears grinding without love, oiled by duty. Spring 1834 cracked the facade. Margaret's courses ceased in March. By April, certainty bloomed, pregnancy. Joy warred with terror, duty fulfilled, yet her mother's grave loomed, a 6th child claiming her life in agony. Dr. Hammond, circuit-riding healer with saddlebags of herbs and hope, confirmed it in May: the bland diets, rest, abstinence post-5th month. Margaret obeyed like scripture, walks in gardens perfumed with jasmine, afternoons in shaded repose. Robert exalted, an heir solidified legacy, collateral for loans, answer to paternal ghosts. Announcements rippled through planter circles, nursery plans unfolded, the southwest room, sun-kissed and spacious, walls papered in pastoral scenes hiding harsh truths. Household pivoted, patience fanning Margaret's brow, maids bearing trays of broth, readings from sentimental novels to soothe. June's humidity descended like a curse, air thick as sin. Margaret withdrew to dim chambers, fans whispering cool relief. Dr. Hammond's mid-month visit affirmed progress, December delivery, a Yuletide miracle, but Heaven's plans diverged. 3 nights later, midnight cramps tore through her like divine fury. Blood-soaked sheets, crimson as Judgment Day. Screams summoned patience, the manservant bolted for Hammond. 2 hours agony, hemorrhaging, consciousness fading in waves of pain. Dawn saw the miscarriage complete, fetus expelled in a torrent, Margaret pale as death's shroud. Hammond's grim prognosis, uterine scars, future conceptions improbable, attempts lethal. God's will, he intoned, voice echoing like a sermon on barrenness. Robert absorbed this in his study, lamplight flickering shadows on walls like accusing fingers. No heir equaled ruin, creditors wary, partners doubting, finances crumbling under tobacco's slump. Fields yielded barely enough, improvements demanded capital denied to the childless. Whiskey burned his throat, numbers blurring into despair. Panic morphed to calculus, boundaries crossed for survival. Margaret retreated into laudanum's embrace, haze dulling edges, days dissolving in narcotic dreams. Hammond prescribed freely, she floated in isolation, patience her anchor. Robert encouraged it, a sequestered wife simplified transgressions. His gaze had lingered on the young servant, beauty noted absently, like fine china. Father's lessons, avoid household entanglements, seek release in town brothels. But necessity birthed monstrosity. She was propertied body his to command. Her lineage promised offspring pale enough to pass, white passing heirs, sold to barren elites or integrated subtly. Biology's cruel irony, children of rape, laundered into legitimacy. Wealth from sales, legacy preserved in secrecy. The idea crystallized in whiskey-fueled nights, a pact with darkness. Guilt flickered like dying embers, biblical echoes of David's sin with Bathsheba, the prophet's finger pointing. Yet, ambition drowned remorse. The plantation's ledgers would soon bear witness, dates, initials, desperate notations. A shadow woman erased, but her legacy haunting like an unquiet spirit. As summer waned, the creek ran low, exposing muddy beds like hidden sins. The fields ripened, tobacco leaves broad as hands uplifted in supplication. But beneath, a storm brewed, divine retribution stirring in the enslaved woman's womb, seeds of justice planted in fertile ground. For every soul commodified, a reckoning loomed, guilt's weight, sin's harvest, redemption's distant dawn. The Hartley saga unfolded not as triumph, but tragedy, a cautionary psalm on power's corruption. Robert's calculations ignored the spiritual arithmetic, souls tallied in heaven's books, where no erasure sufficed. The children to come, 18 vessels of mixed blood, would embody the fracture, innocence born of violation, lives traded like currency. Their white-passing facades masked deeper truths, symbols of hypocrisy's veil. Imagine the servants' quarters at night, candle stubs guttering, whispers of resistance. She, unnamed in records yet central to fate, let's call her Eliza for this tale, though history stole her voice. Her light skin, a curse disguised as privilege, drew the master's eye. European features from some forgotten violation generations prior, ancestry's chain unbroken. Literacy, a dangerous gift, allowed her to read forbidden texts, Bible verses on freedom, like Exodus's promise. As Robert's scheme took shape, the air grew heavier, thunderheads gathering, unseen. Margaret, lost in laudanum fog, sensed shifts, servants averted eyes, Robert's prolonged absences. Patience whispered warnings, but haze muffled them. The first encounter, let's paint it cinematically, for truth demands vivid strokes. Twilight in the weaving house, looms silent as graves. Eliza bent over mending, needle flashing in fading light. Door creaked, Robert's silhouette filled the frame, whiskey breath hot as brimstone. Words unspoken, power's language needed none. Resistance futile, lash awaited defiance. Act consummated in shadows, her tears silent as fallen leaves. Aftermath, guilt seed planted, both literal and spiritual. Robert returned to his study, hand trembling on the ledger. Entry, vague, coded. But heaven recorded fully. Months passed, Eliza's belly swelled in secret. Field dresses hid the curve, house duties lightened unwittingly. Whispers among cabins, master's sin blooming. Elders invoked ancestors' spirits, rituals in moonlight, curbs for protection, prayers for vengeance. Birth in winter's grip, hidden in a cabin, midwives attending under starless sky. Child emerged pale, blue-eyed, miracle or monstrosity. Wrapped in rags, spirited away. Ledger noted, light as cream, past inspection. Sold north, falsified papers, orphan status. Payment fattened coffers, Robert's relief temporary. But soul stain deepened, nightmares of judgment, father's paralyzed form accusing from bed. Thus began the cycle, 18 iterations over years, each child a link in sin's chain. Eliza endured, body a battlefield, spirit unbowed. Biblical parallels abounded, Hagar's wilderness, Sarah's jealousy inverted. Here, the wife barren, the enslaved fruitful, a twisted Genesis. Spiritual undertones chilled, divine retribution whispered in winds, creek floods as baptisms of wrath. Children, scattered, carried Hartley's blood, ghosts haunting lineages. Some rose in white society, unknowing of roots, others sensed otherness, a spiritual void. Historians later unearthed fragments, ledgers charred but surviving, entries shaking with final remorse. Burned it all. God forgive me. Attempted erasure, but truth persists, like weeds through cracks. This part's tale sets the stage, a man's fall from grace, temptation's grip, the enslaved woman's quiet strength. Pacing builds dread exposition laced with sensory immersion, emotional hooks pulling viewers deeper. Cinematic visuals paint the era, golden hour fields contrasting brutality, close-ups on trembling hands, score swelling with tension. Yet, the heart beats spiritual, themes of sin's inheritance, redemption's elusiveness. Guilt as a haunting specter, justice divine and inexorable. Viewers empathize with victims, dread the perpetrator's path, reflect on history's echoes today. As we pause here, the shadows lengthen. What horrors unfold next in this saga of blood and betrayal? The enslaved woman's endurance, the children's fates, the unraveling of a soul damned by its own designs. Stay tuned, for the divine ledger never closes. Yet, the heart beats spiritual, themes of sin's inheritance, redemption's elusiveness. Guilt as a haunting specter, justice divine and inexorable. Viewers empathize with victims, dread the perpetrator's path, reflect on history's echoes today. As we pause here, the shadows lengthen. What horrors unfold next in this saga of blood and betrayal? The enslaved woman's endurance, the children's fates, the unraveling of a soul damned by its own designs. Stay tuned, for the divine ledger never closes. The summer of 1834 hung over Hartley Plantation like a shroud of judgment, the air thick with the buzz of cicadas and the metallic scent of impending storms. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a divine growl warning of reckonings to come, as Robert Hartley III paced his study, the floorboards creaking under his boots like the bones of the damned. Lamplight danced shadows across the walls, illuminating ledgers that chronicled not just crops and costs, but now the blueprints of a moral abyss. He had crossed the threshold, violated the sacred boundaries of humanity, and found, to his chilling relief, that no immediate lightning struck him down. No, the heavens seemed silent, complicit even, in his descent. But silence from above often masks the gathering storm, and Robert's soul, though he ignored it, began to fracture like parched earth under relentless sun. He had rationalized it all in those whiskey-soaked nights following Margaret's miscarriage. Keeping the children himself? Impossible. The risk of exposure, the complications of integration into his world, too perilous. No, his plan was colder, more calculated: engineer their creation, ensure their passable appearance, and broker them into white society for fortunes that would shore up his crumbling empire. It was abomination cloaked in pragmatism, a sin echoing the biblical sale of Joseph by his brothers, but here the betrayer was father and master in one. Robert had glimpsed worse in Richmond's underbelly brothels where innocence was auctioned, gambling dens where lives were wagered. If those dens of vice operated unchecked, why not this? Discretion was the key, documentation the shield. By July, grief for his lost heir mingled with feverish scheming. He penned veiled letters to Richmond attorneys versed in delicate estate matters, querying about orphan placements. Responses trickled in, sealed with wax that smelled of cigar smoke and secrecy. Yes, foundling homes welcomed appropriate infants with generous endowments. Infertile couples, bereaved families, they hungered for heirs, questioning little when babes arrived pale and perfect. The enslaved woman, still a shadow in records, her name erased like a forbidden prayer, became the vessel of his infernal design. He reshuffled her duties, pulling her from Margaret's chambers where Patience's watchful eyes might pry. Now she toiled in the laundry's steam-choked haze, arms plunging into scalding vats, the rhythmic slap of wet linens against washboards a metronome to her silent suffering. Or in the kitchen, where wood smoke stung her eyes and the sizzle of fat masked her stifled breaths. Margaret, adrift in laudanum's foggy embrace, noticed nothing, her world reduced to the soft rustle of bed linens and the distant chime of a grandfather clock marking hours she barely perceived. Patience, however, sensed the shift like a chill wind before rain. She interpreted it as misplaced mercy, sparing Margaret the sight of youth's vitality amid her barren sorrow. But deeper, her spirit recoiled, scriptures whispering of Pharaoh's midwives defying evil decrees. Yet, bound by chains visible and invisible, she held her tongue, her prayers ascending like incense for divine intervention. By September's harvest moon, casting silvery judgment over tobacco fields rustling like conspirators, Robert acted. The details of that first violation remain veiled in history's mercy, perhaps a summon isolation in the weaving house, door bolted against the world, her protests swallowed by the night's oppressive humidity. Outcomes alone testify. By December, her form betrayed the secret, belly swelling under loose calico like a forbidden fruit. No ledger confessed the truth, no reports documented the assault. She simply changed, and the plantation adapted with the mechanical indifference of a machine grinding souls. Whispers rippled through cabins at dusk, elders invoking ancestral spirits under starlit skies, herbs burned in secret rituals to ward off the evil eye. The overseer, Elias Crow, received curt orders: isolate her for moral contamination by a field hand, a lie as thin as morning mist, but unquestioned under threat of the lash. Her new prison, a forgotten tool shed at the plantation's periphery, 15 feet square, dirt floor compacted like hardened hearts. A narrow fireplace spat sparks onto threadbare rugs, a single window, grimed with dust, admitted slivers of light that danced like mocking angels. The door locked from without, a heavy iron bolt clanging like a gavel's fall. Furnishings sparse, a straw mattress sagging on splintered frame, a rickety stool, buckets for necessities that reeked of humiliation. Better than crowded cabins? Marginally. Solitude here was a double-edged blade, space to grieve alone, but isolation that amplified the soul's cries. Meals arrived twice daily, delivered by a kitchen woman whose eyes darted away, forbidden words hanging unspoken in the air. The midwife, Rachel, visited sporadically, her calloused hands probing with clinical detachment, her heart heavy as millstones. Winter descended like God's indifference, winds howling through cracks like lamentations of the prophets. Snow blanketed the fields in deceptive purity, while inside, she paced the confines, hands cradling her burden, murmuring psalms half-remembered from illicit readings. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. The words echoed hollow, divine comfort distant as the stars. Rachel, at 53, had midwife generations, birthed Robert himself under this very roof, a fact she buried like a thorn in her flesh. Her cabin, a modest privilege, smelled of dried herbs and beeswax candles, her diary, secreted under floorboards. Chronicled truths too dangerous for daylight. May 1835, labor gripped her at midnight, pains ripping like divine retribution. Rachel arrived under cover of storm, lanterns swinging shadows across the walls. 14 hours of agony, contractions like waves crashing against unyielding rock, her terror a palpable fog in the cramped space. She spoke in fragments, eyes fixed on rafters as if seeking escape through the thatch. Dissociation, Rachel knew, the mind's merciful flight from a body betrayed. Dawn broke as the child emerged, a boy, 7 pounds of squalling life, skin pale as fresh cream, features fine as porcelain. No malformations, cries robust as a herald's trumpet. White passing, undeniably, place him in a pew among the county's elite, and none would blink. Understanding dawned on Rachel like a curse. This was engineered, a blasphemy against creation. She swaddled him, placed him in arms that trembled. The mother, 18 and shattered, gazed down with sorrow profound as Mary's at the cross, not hatred, but a foreknowledge of loss, eyes memorizing every curve. Healthy, strong, Rachel murmured, voice cracking like dry twigs. Silence answered, save the babe's soft breaths. She reported to Robert in his study, air thick with pipe smoke and ambition. Boy, healthy. Appearance, suitable. His smile chilled her marrow, pleasure unadulterated by guilt. Bring him tomorrow, after dark. A gentleman from Richmond awaits. The interim, 3 days of fragile communion. She nursed him by firelight, flames casting golden halos on his head. Whispers flowed, not coups, but confessions, apologies for a world of chains, promises of love transcending separation. Rachel overheard snatches, heart-fracturing. On the 4th day, Robert arrived with the intermediary, a sleek man in tailored wool, satchel bulging with papers of perdition. They entered, a single scream pierced the air, silenced abruptly. Murmurs followed Robert's directives. Stranger's affirmations, rustle of ink on vellum. The stranger emerged, bundle in arms, striding past Rachel like a thief in the night. Robert paused, tend her recovery. Back to work soon. Then gone, carriage wheels crunching gravel like retreating judgment. Inside, emptiness. She sat statue still, arms cradling void, tears carving silent rivers down her cheeks. Rachel sat vigil, presence her only offering, until exhaustion claimed her charge. That night, diary entry, boy born hale. Taken by shadows. Lord, bear witness to this iniquity. Recovery swift, enforced, back to laundry's inferno, steam veiling her hollow eyes, labor numbing the ache. Household knew gossips and whispers at Wellside, but silence reigned, danger's muzzle. Margaret, opiate phantom, floated oblivious. The child surfaced in Richmond's foundling home, male, 4 days, healthy, anonymous donation. $50 sell for consciences. 3 weeks later, the Harrisons claimed him, childless merchants, heart starved. Adoption seamless, he became Thomas, heir to comforts, education, legacy. Died 1897, pillar of society, origins a sanitized tale. Plantation rhythms resumed, bells tolling dawn, fields alive with bent forms. Robert tallied profits, $200 net, tobacco's rival. Proof of concept, repeatable, lucrative. Sin's seed sprouted. September 1835, pregnant again. No facade this time, staff comprehended the horror. Isolation ritualized, Rachel's attendance a grim sacrament. Robert refined his machine, intermediaries rotated Richmond, Norfolk, Petersburg to blur trails. Ledgers coded, excellent condition, placed north. Payments swelled coffers, debts erased, repairs gleaming, social facades polished. Second child, boy, March 1836, to Norfolk heirs. Third, girl, January 1837, Petersburg bereaved. Fourth, boy, October 1837, Richmond widow. Each $150 to $300, manna from hell. By fifth, August 1838, stability. Plantation flourished outwardly, new plows slicing earth, barns mended against storms. Neighbors envied prudent management, blind to blood money. Margaret dwindled, laudanum's prisoner, rare descents to dinners where candlelight hid her pallor. Patience wrestled demons, faith's pillars cracking, slavery divine? Yet children sank to the absolute. Complicity nod, she offered furtive kindnesses extra bread, whispered God sees. Prayers fervent, unanswered. Community coped variably, denial's veil, silent acknowledgement, twisted approval. Atrocity normalized, resistance suicidal. Rachel suffered deepest, midwife to monstrosity, diary her confessional. Entries detailed, appearances, maternal grief, her own torment. A testament for posterity, powerless now. 6th, June 1839, 7th, March 1840, 8th, January 1841. Mechanical hell, isolate, birth, bond, sever. Her resilience physical marvel, spirit eroding. Rachel noted, silence profound, eyes vacant, labor detached. 9th, late 1841, shift. Birth swift, boy hale, but no tears, no words. She held him, gazed empty as abyss. Something shattered, emotional fortress breached. Robert noted pragmatically, monitor viability, adjust intervals like breeding stock. Spiritual chill deepened, was this divine mercy numbing her soul? Or prelude to vengeance? As years ticked, the plantation's air grew heavier, storms more frequent, creek floods biblical. Children scattered, symbols of fractured redemption, lives built on lies. Thomas thrived unknowing, others perhaps sensed shadows, spiritual voids yawning. Rachel's diary swelled, "How long, O Lord?" Patience prayed for plagues. The woman endured, a living martyr, her silence a thunderous accusation. Robert prospered materially, but nights brought visions, babes' cries, empty arms, judgment's scale tipping. This cycle, a danse macabre of sin, wove themes eternal, greed's corruption, innocence's theft, divine patience straining. Empathy swells for the voiceless, dread for the perpetrator, reflection on legacies tainted. Viewers immerse in cinematic dread, close-ups on tear-streaked faces, wide shots of isolating fields, score of haunting strings. Yet, spiritual undercurrents chill, each child a soul bartered, heaven's ledger accruing debt. Retribution looms, perhaps in unraveling minds, failing crops, or the woman's unbroken gaze promising justice. For in biblical reckoning, the oppressed's cries reach the throne, and no shadow hides forever. By the summer of 1842, the Hartley plantation had transformed into a gilded cage of illusions, its prosperity a facade built on the crumbling foundation of one woman's unrelenting agony. The air shimmered with heat waves rising from tobacco fields, leaves broad and green as envious serpents, whispering secrets in the breeze. Cicadas droned a ceaseless hymn, their rhythm syncing with the distant crack of whips and the muffled sobs from shadowed cabins. Robert Hartley III, now in his 50s, strode the grounds with the arrogance of a man who had outwitted fate, or so he believed. His face, weathered by sun and secrets, bore the lines of calculation rather than conscience, eyes sharp as ledger entries tallying profits from sins unseen. But beneath the surface, spiritual fissures widened, like the creek bed cracking under drought, foretelling floods of retribution. Biblical echoes haunted the land, the parable of the talents twisted into perversion, where human lives were invested not for heaven's gain, but earthly gold. The woman, still a nameless specter in official records, her identity stripped like bark from a felled tree, had endured 9 years of this orchestrated hell. At 33, her body bore the scars of 12 pregnancies, each a chapter in a gospel of suffering. Premature gray streaked her hair, pulled taut in a bun that hid the thinning patches, her skin, once smooth as polished oak, now sagged like wilted leaves, etched with stretch marks resembling lightning bolts of divine displeasure. Chronic aches knotted her joints, a constant reminder of labors not just in fields but in the shadowed cabin where life was forged and stolen. Rachel's diary, hidden like forbidden scripture under her cabin's floorboards, chronicled the descent. "She's aging before my eyes, body weary as the Israelites in bondage. How many more plagues must come before release?" Yet Robert persisted, assigning her lighter duties, mending in the weaving house where looms clack like judgmental tongues, or tending gardens where thorns pricked like accusations of sin. He treated her as prized machinery, oiled with extra rations and rest, not from mercy but maintenance. For her value lay in production, children pale enough to pass as orphans, sold to fuel his ascent. The 10th child arrived in August 1842, a girl born under a harvest moon that bathed the cabin in ethereal silver, her cries piercing the night like a prophet's wail. Rachel's hands, calloused from decades of ushering life into a world of chains, wrapped her in coarse linen, noting the flawless features, skin like fresh snow, eyes blue as untroubled skies. Taken after 3 days of whispered maternal vows, placed with a Fredericksburg family barren of heirs. The 11th, June 1843, a boy, robust and fair, his tiny fists clenching as if grasping at freedom denied. Sold to Petersburg merchants, his legacy unknowingly bolstering Robert's coffers. 12th, March 1844, another girl, delicate as porcelain, her arrival amid spring rains that turned paths to mud, symbolizing the mire of moral decay. Each birth deepened the spiritual chill. These were not mere infants, but souls forged in violation, echoes of Hagar's wilderness exile, cast out for the sake of false inheritance. Robert's plantation flourished outwardly, new lands acquired, barns rising like arrogant towers of Babel, dowries lavished on sisters to secure alliances. Neighbors envied his prudent stewardship, blind to the blood money staining his wealth. Social gatherings resumed, candlelit dinners where crystal clinked like false toasts, laughter masking the distant echoes of a woman's silent screams. But the 13th, January 1845, cracked the illusion. Born in winter's grip, frost rhyming the cabin window like accusatory script, the girl emerged with skin a shade darker, features hinting at her mother's heritage, nose broader, curls tighter. Robert's ledger noted the flaw coldly, features less satisfactory. Placement difficult. Lingering 5 months in a Richmond foundling home, damp and echoing with orphan cries, she fetched a mere $75 from rural farmers, not the usual $200 to $300. Dehumanization peaked, children as commodities, valued by Hugh like grated tobacco leaves. Biblical symbolism loomed, Cain's mark, perhaps, branding the sinners produce as unworthy. Spring brought Margaret's quiet end, her chamber heavy with laudanum's sweet decay, bed linens yellowed like aged parchment. At 30, she resembled a crone, heart failing in sleep, a merciful release from nervous exhaustion, the doctor intoned, but truly from grief's poison and willful blindness. Robert mourned performatively, black armbands, subdued tones, 6 months of isolation echoing his own spiritual quarantine. Then, courtship of Eleanor, a 43-year-old widow from North Carolina, her face stern as a Puritan judge, eyes pragmatic as balanced scales. No romance, but alliance, she sought security, he a veil of respectability. Wed in November 1845, under a chapel's stained glass casting judgmental rainbows, Eleanor seized household reins with iron efficiency. She discerned the truth swiftly, whispers from servants, Robert's furtive ledger glances, but chose complicity, raised in slavery's shadow where morals bent like reeds in wind. Keep it from my sight, she demanded, voice sharp as a scythe. Boundaries drawn, no mentions, no sightings. Suited Robert, Eleanor proved capable, managing with a firmness Margaret lacked. Pregnancies resumed, 14th, September 1846, boy pale as moonlight, 15th, July 1847, girl with golden locks, 16th, May 1848, another boy, cries strong as thunder. The woman, now 37, 13 years into torment, withered visibly, frame gaunt as famine's victim, stepped shuffling like the weary in Job's trials. Rachel's entries despaired, thin as reeds, bleeding unending. Next will claim her, as Pharaoh's last plague. Robert, 60 and vigorous, buried his father in 1847, the invalids passing a release from earthly burdens. He tracked his offspring covertly, some thriving in adopted homes, merchants' sons, society daughters, his legacy scattered like seeds on stony ground. Yet spiritual unrest stirred, dreams of accusing eyes, children's faces morphing into his own. The 17th, March 1849, resistance ignited. Rachel's diary captured the blaze. Robert and overseer Crow entered the cabin, air thick with post-birth sweat and herbs. The woman clutched her boy, whispering final pleas. No, she uttered, voice a thunderclap in silence. They pried him free, her nails raking like thorns of the crown. Crow struck, dazing her with a blow that split lip, blood tasting of iron judgment. Keening rose, inhuman wail, more than mortal lament. Punishment, 3 days locked, no sustenance, cabin reeking of despair. Rachel found her in filth, eyes vacant as the abyss. Thought death claimed her spirit, she wrote. But survival persisted, mechanical as a golem, returning to labors with hollow gaze. Whispers spread, madness claimed her. Cabins at night flickered with candlelight vigils, elders invoking spirits for vengeance. The 18th pregnancy, late summer 1855, at 44, perilously aged, body a ruined temple. Rachel begged termination, she'll perish, child deformed. Robert refused, one final yield. Economic calculus, sunk costs, minimal value left, extract last profit, even if death followed. Like the widow's might extracted cruelly, ignoring heaven's ledger. Torment escalated, sickness unrelenting, swelling cracking skin like parched earth, fevers burning as hellfire previews. Confined, bed sores festering like sins exposed. March 1856, Rachel and Eleanor pleaded financial framing, loss total if both die. Robert demurred, 3 months more. Labor in late May, 6 weeks early, 42 hours of agony, contractions feeble as dying faith. Rachel and aides labored in the dim, herb-scented space, voices urging like angels at Gethsemane. The girl emerged at dawn, June 4, 1856, 4 pounds, cry faint as distant hope. Mother hemorrhaged, life ebbing in crimson pools, dying without touch or word, eyes glazing like forgotten prayers. Rachel cradled the babe, despair washing like baptismal waters. Reported to Robert, mother gone, child fragile. He inspected, features his mirror, nose, eyes, chin unmistakable. Panic flickered, resemblance a damning seal, risking exposure. Monitor survival. The infant lingered 3 days, nursed in Rachel's arms, then breath ceased June 7, buried unmarked beside mother, earth swallowing secrets. Guilt not Robert, not for exploitation, but risk. Ledger loomed, chronicle of crimes. September 1856, purged documents fed to flames, intermediaries' letters curling black. But ledger spared, vanity's relic hidden in wall compartment. Normalcy beckoned, but judgment descended. November 1856, first fire raised tobacco barn, harvest inferno lighting night like apocalyptic dawn. No cause, arson deliberate. Guards posted, interrogations brutal. December, stables ablaze, horses screaming like souls in torment. January, main house wings scorched, smoke choking like brimstone. Sabotage multiplied, tools shattered, supplies rotted, livestock poisoned. Operations crumbled, workers defiant, overseers savage, cycle vicious as original sin. Reserves drained, bankruptcy loomed, tobacco fickle, secret income vanished. Eleanor's stroke in April, weakened, care demanding, household fracturing. Robert puzzled, his treatment standard, exploitation common. But spiritually, fires evoke Sodom's brimstone, or Elijah's altar blaze, divine arson avenging the oppressed. Woman's death unleashed curse? Or heaven's patience exhausted, plagues for Pharaoh's heart? Rachel's diary hinted, entries on justice's flames, perhaps complicity turned to action. But mystery lingered, Plantation's downfall a parable, sin's harvest reaped in fire. Empathy surges for the woman, martyr to greed, dread for Robert's unraveling, reflection on legacies of injustice. Cinematic, flames leaping in slow mo, close-ups on ledger ashes, score of ominous drums. Yet, chilling core, divine justice inexorable, soul's cries igniting heavenly wrath. No escape for the oppressor, grave's whisper eternal. In the fading light of 1857, the Hartley plantation lay under a pall of impending doom, its once vibrant fields now choked with weeds that twisted like fingers of accusation from the soil. The air carried the acrid tang of smoke, not from curing tobacco, but from the remnants of deliberate infernos that had scarred the land like divine brands. Winds whispered through the skeletal remains of barns and stables, carrying echoes of long-suppressed cries, as if the very earth mourned the atrocities it had witnessed. Robert Hartley III, at 61, wandered his crumbling domain like a ghost haunting his own life, face gaunt, eyes hollowed by paranoia, hands trembling as they clutched a flask of whiskey that burned but never cleansed. The sunsets bled crimson across the Piedmont hills, symbolic of the blood debt accumulating in heaven's books, a biblical reckoning for sin sown in fertile ground. For years, he had wielded power absolute, blind to the spiritual undercurrents eroding his throne. But now, the covenant of fear that bound his workforce shattered, unleashing a quiet apocalypse foretold in scriptures, the Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. What Robert could not fathom, ensconced in his ivory tower of privilege, was the invisible web of solidarity that had woven through the enslaved community. The woman is Sarah, as whispers and fragments suggested, though history stole even that had not been a solitary shadow. Before her isolation in that forsaken cabin, she had shared meals by flickering hearth fires in communal quarters, her light skin and quiet demeanor marking her as both privileged and perilous. Elders remembered her arrival from Maryland, a girl of 14 with eyes that held the depth of ancient sorrows. She had mended clothes with deft fingers, shared stories under moonlit skies of forbidden literacy, verses from Exodus smuggled like contraband hope. The community had watched her transformation, pregnancies swelling like curses, births attended in secrecy, infants vanishing like smoke. 18 times, they had borne witness to the violation, powerless under the lash's threat, their silence a forced vow. But her endurance became legend in hushed cabin tales, a modern Hagar, cast into the wilderness not once, but repeatedly, her womb a battlefield where innocence was forged and forfeited. Her death in 1856, bleeding out on that straw mattress amid the metallic scent of blood and the faint cries of her final child, snapped the fragile thread of compliance. The enslaved had clung to a desperate illusion: obedience might yield mercy, cooperation could carve slivers of safety in hell's landscape. Sarah had given everything: body, spirit, 18 lives, and received naught but exploitation until her frame collapsed like a temple desecrated. If submission brought no shield, why submit? Divine justice, they murmured in spiritual gatherings at dawn, drawing from ancestral rites and biblical promises: vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. No formal rebellion erupted, no Nat Turner uprising with blades gleaming under starlight. Instead, resistance bloomed organically, decentralized as wildflowers in untended fields. Individuals in clusters acted in shadows, a match struck in the tobacco barn at midnight, flames leaping hungrily to devour the harvest, heat waves distorting the night like warped visions of hellfire. Tools accidentally shattered in the carpentry shop, handles splintering with a crack like breaking bones. Livestock gates left ajar under cover of fog, animals scattering into the woods like freed souls. Supplies in the smokehouse spoiled through negligence, the stench of rot a metaphor for the moral decay at the plantation's core. These acts, untraceable as whispers on the wind, accumulated like sins in a confessional, eroding operational sinews. Robert raged in his study, quill scratching frantic notes in margins, suspects listed, punishments decreed. He increased floggings, the whip's snap echoing like thunderclaps of false authority, blood staining the yard where once Sarah's children had been conceived in silence. Rewards dangled extra rations, lighter duties for betrayals, but loyalty to the collective memory of Sarah proved stronger than bribes. Speeches from the veranda, voice booming with patriarchal bluster about shared prosperity, fell on ears deafened by years of hypocrisy. The workforce had, in spiritual unison, revoked his dominion, a quiet exodus from Pharaoh's grasp, without needing Moses' staff. Violence escalated would only destroy the labor he coveted, leaving him king of ruins. June 1857 brought Eleanor's demise, her chamber heavy with the cloying scent of laudanum and decay, body weakening over days until breath ceased. Officially, stroke complications, but suspicions lingered like fog over the creek poisons from kitchen herbs, known to those who brewed stews and remedies. 1850s medicine, rudimentary as alchemical guesses, could prove nothing. The doctor, eyes averted, signed the certificate, private doubts buried like unmarked graves. Robert stood alone now, a solitary figure in the cavernous house where portraits of ancestors glared down like judgmental seraphim. Fathers dead, wives claimed by the reaper, no heirs to claim his tainted throne. Evenings stretched into drunken vigils, the study's air thick with pipe smoke and regret, flames in the hearth casting dancing shadows that mimicked accusing specters. The secret ledger emerged from its wall crypt, pages turned with reverent dread, 18 entries, clinical as a merchant's tally, dates, descriptions, payments. Light as cream, sold north. Blue-eyed, excellent condition. Each line a nail in his soul's coffin. Genetic legacy dispersed like seeds in the parable, growing in strangers' gardens. Questions tormented him in the witching hours, worth it? Financial salvation evaporated like morning dew, social eminence crumbled like dry soil. Sarah's silent endurance haunted eyes that never begged, body that yielded yet never broke until the end. The final child's face, his mirror in miniature, a divine joke exposing hubris. Perhaps the fires were her vengeance, spirits stirred from the grave. Scriptures flooded his mind, Job's lamentations, David's psalms of guilt after Bathsheba. In September, amid a stupor, he scrawled the damning epitaph, burned it all. God forgive me. Hand shaking like autumn leaves, ink blotching like tears. He torched the cabin, flames roaring, heat searing his face, catharsis fleeting as embers died. Documents fed to fireplaces, letters curling black, but the ledger spared vanity's anchor, proof of ingenuity turned millstone. Records grew erratic, balances skewed, margins scrawled with paranoia watched. Betrayed? Mental unraveling mirrored the plantations, fields fallow, buildings sagging like weary sinners. October 15, 1857, discovered slumped at his desk, coffee cooling untouched, heart stilled. Natural? Poisoned? Stress's fatal grip? No autopsy pierced the mystery. Buried in family plot under gray skies, eulogy delivered by the minister who had once visited Sarah's cabin, words bitter as gall, respected planter, legacy maintainer. Unspoken, ash in his mouth, heaven's judgment withheld for the pulpit. Inheritance fell to a distant cousin, arriving to chaos, 60 escaped north, shadows melting into free territories like biblical refugees. Remainders defiant, work minimal, eyes gleaming with latent fire. 2 years feudal revival ended in 1859 sale, land carved like a carcass, enslaved auctioned or fled. Civil War in 1861 ravaged remnants, house looted, fields trampled by boots, cabins collapsing into rot. Reconstruction scattered survivors, sharecropping in Virginia's scarred earth, migrations north to urban promises, Philadelphia's bustle, New York's clamor, Boston's chill. Memories carried like sacred relics, tales of Sarah's quiet rage, endurance a beacon in oral histories fading with generations. Rachel, in her 70s, found refuge in Philadelphia's colored hospital, wards echoing with coughs and cries of the traumatized. Hands that had delivered 18 lives now soothed the dying, herbs brewing comfort amid post-war flux. In 1889, nearing 85, death's shadow looming, she dispatched her diary to an abolitionist press, 40 years secreted truth, pages yellowed as aged skin, handwriting steady as her resolve. Excerpts ran in fall issues, horrors unveiled, readers recoiling, demands for probes, dismissals as propaganda. The minister's 1890s memoirs corroborated, veiled accounts of witnessed suffering, adding ecclesiastical weight. Historians delved in the 1900s, cross-referencing diary with ledgers, church logs, foundling admissions. Pattern crystallized, systematic exploitation, 18 children over 2 decades. The ledger surfaced in 1931, University Archives' dusty trove, a graduate's epiphany, coded entries aligning with Rachel's chronicle. Genealogical hunts in 1940s traced 12 ordinary lives, marriages in sunlit chapels, children laughing in yards, deaths peaceful in feather beds. Descendants, dozens by then, confronted revelations, family lore shattered, some embracing truths explaining ethereal otherness, others denying with vehemence. 6 vanished into anonymity, youthful deaths? Hidden trails? History's void swallowed them. Sarah herself, elusive as a prophet's vision. Diaries S hinted Sarah, ledgers anonymized, census vague. A 1940s lead, Detroit elders' tales of escaped grandmother recounting Sarah on Hartley, grief veiled, rage smoldering. But hearsay across eras proved nothing. Grave lost to subdivisions, asphalt ceiling secrets. Academic tomes in 1950s-60s dissected, economists on adoption black markets, medics on pregnancy tolls, psychologists on trauma scars, legists on retroactive justice. Footnote in slavery annals, emblem of systems depravity. Unresolved, 1856-57 sabotages, coordinated vengeance? Timing screamed yes, fire's biblical plagues avenging Sarah. Historians debated, deliberate pushback or romanticized narrative? Coincidence or collective spirit? Ultimately, the collapse spoke, post-Sarah, the edifice crumbled, exploitation's weight snapping like overtaxed beams. Today, cite a banal shopping center, cars humming over buried bones, marker bland, tobacco plantation, 1768-1859. No whisper of darkness. Ledger in vault, gloves handling fragile testimony, Rachel's diary preserved, smudges perhaps tears. Sarah, history's gap, humanity negated. No words hers, only biological echoes in unknowing descendants, Americans ordinary, roots in violation. Horror profound, erasure's completeness. Slavery's gears ground souls to dust, records controlled by oppressors. Sarah survived via Robert's vanity, Rachel's courage. How many untold? Thousands erased, children unwitting testaments. Questions echo in archives, over parking lots, for every documented agony, multitudes lost. Ledger rests, final plea, God forgive me. But forgiveness? Proof endures, partial justice in remembrance. Sarah existed, endured, bore 18. System fell after her, divine hand? Mother's curse? Matters not. She will not fade, truth's flame unquenchable, burning through attempts to extinguish. In this saga's close, reflect, wounds unhealed, injustices profound. Documentation honors, but restitution impossible. Sarah, at 44, used up, nameless grave, yet her story pierces, demanding we bear witness, lest history repeat its sins.